Hello, everyone. This is Brian Tonsoni, your host tonight for Sports Talk with Tonsoni. I'm joined with Sammy Jacobs from Hoosier Huddle, and we are going to discuss the championship college football matchups of the weekend and the college football playoff rankings that came out today. A lot of talk about who is going to make the Final Four of the NCAA football, and some very good games as well today. So, Sammy, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on.
Thanks for having me on, Brian. Hopefully nobody calls the cops on us this week, and we'll have a good time.
Yeah, Sammy and I got into a little heated argument at the last tailgate, and someone thought we were really having an argument. It was just two friends bantering. But we're not going to discuss any local football today, lest we get into a real depressing conversation. We're going to talk about some really good football this week, and there are the Power 5 championship games are all this weekend. And Sammy, as the expert, I'm going to give you the games and have you explain to our listeners what you think will happen in the games and players to watch, and then I'll try to ask some questions as a fan. But let's start off with probably the least important game, the Pac-12 championship with Stanford versus USC. What should fans look for in that matchup?
Well, you have a matchup between two great running backs. You have Bryce Love at Stanford, and I am blanking on the guy from USC real quickly. But, Ronald Jones II is the other running back. You have Sam Darnold as well, who's coming off a disappointing year, which means he'd probably end up on the Jets next year and finish his career there in disappointing fashion. But you're right. It has no implication really on the college football playoff, as USC is ranked 10th, Stanford ranked 12th. I don't think there's enough craziness that could go on to put those in the top four. Stanford's kind of a sleeper pick there to be in that Pac-12 championship game. A lot of people thought it'd be Washington, and it's disappointing a year for the Pac-12 team in that playoff race.
So, I think Stanford might be the team that's going to come out on top simply because they played really well down the stretch, defeating Notre Dame and the running attack of Bryce Love. And I just like Coach Shaw, and I like the way he operates that team. They didn't get off to a good start this year, had some early losses, but I think they have the momentum. USC probably has the talent. You have a pro quarterback that everyone's talking about whether he comes out this year or not, and he may decide to come back for another year after a disappointing year. But I think I'm going with Stanford in this game. Who do you have?
Stanford's 10-2 this year. They've won 6 out of the last 7 games. They're playing really well. The game, I believe, is at Levi Stadium, and that's almost a Stanford home game. I would lead Stanford just that they're playing really, really well right now. I'm sorry, USC has won 6 out of the last 8. They've played really well too. But Stanford, if Bryce Love is healthy, they're a different team. Sam Darnold, I think, comes back depending. He's made it pretty clear that he does not want to play for the Cleveland Browns. Stanford, they had those 2 early losses. They lost to Southern Cal earlier in the year, 42-24 at Southern Cal. It's kind of the theme of revenge games that came up earlier in the year with Ohio State and Penn State and all that stuff. So it's another revenge game, so to speak, there. But they've lost 1 game since the mid-September, and that was a 3-point loss at Washington State. So, yeah, they're playing really well. They beat Notre Dame by 18 points last week. 3-point win against California in a rivalry game. They beat Washington 30-22. So it's going to be a close one, and I'm excited to watch it. It's something I'll watch on Friday as well. But yeah, I'll take Stanford there too.
Okay, so we're in agreement on the first one. No need to call the cops. So let's go to the next one that I have ranked, the Big 12 conference, and they don't have divisions, right? And so it's just number 1 and number 2 in the standings playing for a championship.
Correct.
That seems odd, right? To me. So that's TCU versus Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship. Tell us a little bit about those teams and who you think is going to win that matchup.
It does seem a little odd, but as a Big Ten fan, I kind of like the non-division things. Everybody gets a shot at one another, but this is a game of playoff implication. It's a game that could make that really could create some of the craziness. Oklahoma's coming in at number 3. TCU, I think, is out no matter what at 11. It's just hard to see them jump all those teams to get in there at 11. But, if they beat Oklahoma, that'll open the door for Alabama or Ohio State to get in there, depending how those other teams, those other games, pan out. But Oklahoma's been playing well. Their one loss is a 7-point loss to Iowa State. Iowa State had a great year. They had a couple top 5 wins and finished 7-5. But Oklahoma hasn't lost since that game in early October. They thumped West Virginia last week. They thumped a good TCU team, and then they beat Oklahoma State in that shootout a couple weeks ago. So Baker Mayfield's playing as good as anybody, but TCU, it could give them a run too. The game earlier, they've played each other before. It was in early November.
I think it was 38-20, I think, wasn't it, Oklahoma?
Yeah, 38-20, Oklahoma. I just think Oklahoma has too much firepower for TCU.
Yeah, TCU's known for their defense. I think I counted today they had 5 games under 10 points allowed, and then they had a 6th game that was under 14 points allowed. So they're known for their defense. And this is a game of a solid defense in TCU against a really solid offense in Oklahoma. And I think in the Big 12, you got to outscore Oklahoma if you're going to beat them. And so I think Oklahoma's offense is going to be better than this solid TCU defense. I'm a big Baker Mayfield fan. I know that he's planted the flag at Ohio State, and I know that he had some issues with grabbing his private parts in a gesture after the Kansas players did not shake hands at the beginning of the game. Give me a competitor. I can't condone those types of behaviors, and I would wish that he would not do those things. But tell me one college football fan who wouldn't want a guy like Baker Mayfield being their quarterback. And so I think some of this anti-Baker stuff was a little bit I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but I think it was a little overblown. And in this day and age where there's 60 cameras too, that stuff happened all the time in the very competitive days, 60s, 70s, 80s. It just wasn't caught. And the players need to know better. But, man, I'll take that kid on my team any day. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing with Baker Mayfield for me was that he got arrested in the offseason, resisting arrest, and that took over the offseason. They had a video of him running from the cops, getting tackled, and it kind of became a joke. But, as far as the on-the-field antics and stuff, man, if you don't like it, stop them. Don't let them score points. It's like the old University of Miami days. You don't like us dancing in the end zone? Don't let us in the end zone. And I think society nowadays has become a little too soft on this. They want kids to be robots. We got to remember these are kids 18 to 22 years old. It's a game. It's supposed to be fun. Now, you could take trash talking a little too far with some racial epithets and stuff like that. But, man, if you don't like it, don't let him, shake his hand at the beginning of the game and go play defense.
Yeah, and I'm picking Baker Mayfield, and I think Oklahoma wins, and I think you're with me on that too as well, correct?
Correct.
All right, moving on to the third game, and these are all somewhat close in relevance, so we're going to go close home in Indianapolis here, the Big Ten Championship, Ohio State versus undefeated Wisconsin. Tell us a little bit about those teams in the Big Ten.
Oh, man. Let's start with Wisconsin. They're undefeated. They're getting very little respect on who they've played this year. It's a part of a bigger story on how uneven these divisions are in the Big Ten. They're 12-0. I think the only ranked team they've beaten was Northwestern and maybe Iowa, and that Iowa loss does not look or win does not look as great as they thought they were after Iowa beat Ohio State. But the Northwestern win's a nice win and things like that. But we played Wisconsin this year at IU, and in all game you felt like IU could beat them, and they're just so frustrating to play because they do the same darn thing. They just run the ball, do play action fakes, and you think, God, this is so freaking simple. We could stop it. But you know what? They are great at what they do. It's typical Wisconsin football. They run the ball. They have play action off of it. They play great defense, and they hardly beat themselves. So they're a good football team. Ohio State on the other side, this is where it could get interesting. Wisconsin comes in at number 4 in the playoff rankings. Ohio State's at number 8. It's going to be dicey. If Ohio State comes in and does what they did to Wisconsin a couple years ago, beats them 59-0, what do? I mean, that's an impressive victory. They've beaten a Penn State team who was ranked in the top 5, but they have 2 losses. They lost at home to Oklahoma, and they got destroyed by an Iowa team who you're thinking, how the heck did they do that to Ohio State? And this wasn't a Kinnick Stadium upset where they win by a late field goal like they have in the past. This is a butt whooping. And, you know, does the committee overlook that if it's a close Ohio State victory? You know, how many points is Ohio State going to have to win by to jump these teams like Miami, Georgia, and Alabama?
Yeah. Yeah, have you heard anything about JT Barrett? I know that he took a hard hit last Saturday. Is his health in question for this game?
I don't think so. I think he's supposed to play. They blamed it on people on the sideline, which I get. I understand. I'm on the sideline taking photos, and there's a ton of people down there who are just like extra people, you know, former players, people, students helping with the parabolic mics and all that stuff. I think he'd play.
Yeah. Who has the most talent here? I think it's pretty obvious. I would say Ohio State is probably the better team eye test wise. Wisconsin is physical and does what they do well. But I haven't seen a line on this or anything, but Ohio State has to be favored, correct?
I don't know. I hate the term eye test because my
too.
eyes look at something different than your eyes, and things like that. And college football it's not like college basketball where you have 30 games to look at. You have 12 games. You're playing once a week, and it's just you've seen it this year. You saw it 10 years ago in 2007. It's just crazy. I mean, who would have thought that Iowa would put up 55 or 54, whatever they did against Ohio State, and then get essentially shut out against Wisconsin the next week? It's who knows?
Do you sense, and I sense this, that with Ohio State, they lost a very good game, and Oklahoma's ranked high, number 3. That's a loss. The loss at Iowa was probably a focus issue more than a scheme or talent issue. And when you play 12 or 13 games a year, there's always a chance that a team may not bring its best game, and then it's snowballed. And then you go into this game, and I think Urban Meyer is going to have their attention, and they have a chance to slide back into the playoffs. And I think they're going to want to prove to people that they weren't that team at Iowa. And I just see a very hungry, talented Ohio State team, and I think that's scary. That's got to be scary for Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean, they did get thumped at home by Oklahoma. That was a game their offense looked plain. Their fans wanted Kevin Wilson fired. They wanted JT Barrett benched. And then there's just no explanation for the Iowa game. They were in it, up at right until halftime. So I don't think it was a total focus issue. It was maybe they weren't, ready for the second half, and they just got their butts kicked and didn't respond well to that. To me, it's a question the committee has to take in hand. How much are you going to weigh this Iowa victory against the win?
Who do you have winning the Big Ten championship, Wisconsin or Ohio State?
Oh, God. I
You're on
really,
record.
I really, really, really don't want Ohio State to win. Um, and I just don't like them. And I will go on record on saying that I do not like Ohio State. Uh,
I second
but
that.
but as a Big Ten fan, if they don't get a team in the playoff, I think that they really seriously consider realigning the divisions and things like that. So I mean, we'll see. I every time Ohio State's gone up against a good defense, they've struggled, and Wisconsin has a good defense. But I think it's going to be a pro Ohio State crowd, like Wisconsin. It's going to
And
be a bruiser.
not so fast, young man. I'm going to go with Ohio State. I just think I've seen both of them at Memorial Stadium play in IU this year, and I just was a little more impressed with Ohio State. But I will say this: I think Wisconsin does what they do better than Ohio State. I just think Ohio State might have some better athletes, and if they come focused, that might be the difference. So let's move on now to the ACC. We have Miami, who fell from 2 to 7 after their loss at Pitt, playing against the new number one, Clemson Tigers. Tell us a little bit about that matchup.
Well, this is another matchup that could create some chaos as well. Clemson coming in at number 1, Miami at number 7. You'd think that if Miami wins, their only losses to Pitt. They didn't look great against Pitt. Of course, Pitt's not a really good team. They lost, but they're playing the number 1 team. And whether or not you think Clemson should be number 1, well, the committee does, and the people who actually matter, not us Joe Schmoes sitting here in the basement. So I think if they win, they beat number 1, they're going to slide in there. Clemson's only loss came at Syracuse, and that was because their quarterback Bryant got hurt. Around sometime in the first half, was out the second half, and it was a close game, but they're just a different team without Kelly Bryant playing. But that defense is really good. They finished up 11-1 games in Charlotte, so that's closer to Clemson. Should be a ton of Clemson fans there. The first time Miami's in an ACC title game. It's really hard to believe since they've been in the ACC, I believe, since 2002. So I'm going to go with Clemson on this one. I think Miami's run out of gas after they peaked against Notre Dame, and then they hit a wall against Virginia, rebounded nicely there to run off, I think, 30 some odd straight points. But they've hit a wall, and I think Clemson's going to take care of business.
I think this is a game of 2 outstanding defenses, and I love the Miami turnover chain. I like that idea. I don't think that's showboating or anything. I think that's motivating their team, and I kind of think that's a unique way to celebrate takeaways, as we say here at Indiana, or turnovers. But and so it could be a really low-scoring game. I think Clemson has a little more on the offensive side and has played a tougher schedule. Miami might be a little focused after a couple wake-up calls after their big win against Notre Dame. There's a lot to play for. I'm joining you. I'm going to say it's the Clemson Tigers. I might be rooting for Miami because as much as I like Dabo Swinney, and I think he's an outstanding coach, I kind of like to see new teams in the playoffs. And Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State have been there before, and my rooting interest is a little bit different than my selection difference. So that leaves us with what I think is the biggest championship game, or the game has the 2 best teams in it, and that is Georgia versus Auburn for the SEC championship. Sammy, talk about that game.
Well, if we have any repeat viewers, one, thank you for sticking with us, idiots. But I went on record earlier saying the SEC was the worst Power 5 conference, and I'm going to stick to that. I think they do have, they're really top heavy, but who else do they have? I mean, you have Alabama, who was, as of last week, the best team in the country. They lost a 2-loss Auburn team. Alabama's best win is LSU, who's somehow still at 17. They barely beat Mississippi State, who is somehow at 23. I think the SEC is getting way too much respect. here. So you know what? The winner of this game is in, no doubt. Georgia's sitting at 6. I think if they win, I don't think this game affects Alabama as much as maybe you think. But the winner of this game is definitely in. It's an impressive victory. If Georgia wins, it's another revenge game for them. If Auburn wins, they have probably the three best wins in the playoff body. I mean, they beat Alabama, they beat Georgia, who were both number 1 at the time. They did lose to Clemson, but that was in week 2. And this Auburn team is just playing really, really good football right now.
Go ahead.
On paper, I think this is going to be the best game to watch, but I don't think it's the most important game to the playoff.
I would agree with you on both of those. I think Georgia's going to have some revenge, and they're from their quarterback, and I think they do some nice things and have battled all year. And Auburn has just come on from a couple losses to really have great wins. And so, in beating Georgia and beating Alabama, I think that's just solid. And one more win for them would just be remarkable, and I think they deserve. But this is a game, the SEC championship. I think it's a top-heavy conference. To kind of agree with you about the depth of the conference is not what it has been in the past. I think there are other conferences that may be deeper, and they're middle. Some of the middle of these other conferences are more competitive than what the SEC has been. But I don't think that's going to take away from the competitiveness and the rivalry here. But I'm saying Auburn continues its hot streak and will represent the SEC in the Final Four. Who's your pick?
I will go – well, it depends if Auburn's running back plays. If he's hurt and out, that changes the whole dynamic of the game. If he plays, I think Auburn wins. If he doesn't, I think Georgia wins. The game is in Atlanta. I think it'll be a pro-Georgia crowd. A lot of Auburn's pretty close, too, so it might be 50-50. Georgia also has a history of losing these big games. But I'm going to take – if Auburn's running back is playing, they'll win. If not, Georgia's going to win.
Okay, so there's some interesting tidbits. So we're going to wrap up this podcast with a discussion of the playoff rankings that came out. We're recording this Tuesday night, and we have some interesting rankings. Number 1 through 4 are all playing in different championship games, and if those 4 teams win, it's easy to see 1 through 4 match up, and one is and Sammy, correct me if I'm wrong. I looked at them quickly when you texted them to me, but Clemson's number 1, Auburn's number 2,
Yep.
Oklahoma's number 3, and Wisconsin is number 4.
Correct.
So very easy. If those 4 teams win, that's your matchup. I don't see any reordering. I don't see Oklahoma jumping over Auburn, switching 2 and 3, and not that matters. They're going to play each other. The interesting thing, and Sammy will get your take on this, is number 5 is Alabama, right? Number 6 is Georgia, right? Number 7, Miami, and number 8 is Ohio State. So you have 3 of the teams playing the top 4, sitting at 6, 7, and 8. If they win, do they automatically jump up and take those spots? Or does an Alabama sitting there not playing have the advantage of not playing and not risking a loss, sneak in if there's some upsets? So, and then you have the outlier of the Big 12, and we'll talk about that. So that's the playoff order. Talk about what you think. Is it the right order, wrong order, and what do you think is going to happen after these championship games?
Well, I think it's the right order, 1 through 4, 1 through – we'll do 1 through 8. I think TCU should be a little higher than 11th. I said earlier to you in a text, I thought if they won, they would have some really good wins on their resume, and they could sneak in as well. But at 11, I don't think they're going to jump all these teams. Usually in the BCS era, it was usually that team that sat in the 3rd or 4th spot that didn't play in the conference championship game who had the advantage. I don't think that's the case with Alabama this year. I think having Ohio State go to the playoff last year was a mistake that the committee wants to rectify. Alabama didn't win their division. They're not going to win their conference. Their resume's not all that great. Their best win it was probably Mississippi State, maybe LSU. They beat a Florida State team who came into the season in the top 5, who stinks. They need a makeup game against Louisiana Monroe to get bowl eligible. So I think they're in a rough spot not playing this weekend. But if Georgia beats Auburn, they're in. If Miami beats Clemson, they're in. And I hate to say it, but if Ohio State, the only way Alabama, I think, could get in is if Ohio State has a close win over Wisconsin. Because I don't think they're sold on Wisconsin being an undefeated team. And if a 2-loss Ohio State team barely beats them, that just wipes the Big Ten out and say, you know what, Alabama's been the best team up until the last week. We're going to stick them back in there.
What, crazy things happen. And I agree that position-wise, Alabama's sitting in the spot traditionally that had been favorable. If the top teams lose, they just move up. But I don't think it's that easy. The 2 games that I think really matter, and see if you agree with me, I think Oklahoma needs to win. If TCU wins, they're not going to the Final Four, which then opens up an Alabama, maybe a 2-loss Clemson if they get beat, something like that. If Ohio State and TCU both win, then you're going to have 2 spots open, and then I think you might see Ohio State and Alabama possibly move in, and that would then have 2 potential SEC schools. Or no, yeah. Well, no, then you have to have one left out. So does Alabama get it? Does Ohio State get it because they beat the number 4 team? So
are you going to put in Alabama over the SEC champion who beat them?
No. I'm saying that there's going to be one slot, but if Ohio State and TCU both upset the leaders right now, then that comes
2 spots.
That would actually open up one. It would open up. Well, you're right, because Oklahoma would drop out.
Yeah.
So Oklahoma and Wisconsin would drop out. That open up 2, and you have the SEC champ and you have the ACC champ, and then you would have Alabama, Ohio State, and whoever lost maybe ACC with 2 losses. That's when it's going to get crazy, I think.
Well, it'll get crazy if Auburn beats Georgia, Ohio State beats Wisconsin in a close game, and TCU beats Oklahoma. Now, if Georgia beats Auburn, are you going to leave Auburn out, who beat Alabama, and put them in? I mean, it's going to be crazy if that happens.
Yeah, I wouldn't, because I don't think a 3-loss team, regardless how many good wins they have, deserves to be in the Final Four when there's only 4.
No, but apparently the SEC matters more.
Yes.
To the committee, and that's what it seems like. But, yeah, it gets really hairy. Who do you put in? Do you put in –
Let me go out on a limb. I don't think Alabama deserves to be considered. They didn't win their division. They didn't win their conference. Their schedule didn't turn out to be very tough. And you look at the teams behind them at 6, 7, 8, and even TCU has better wins. And I understand that resumes change. Florida State was a top team when Alabama played them, and it changed. But that's part of what happens when you evaluate. And if we're not going to evaluate these things, we're just going to anoint Alabama and Ohio State in every year because, boy, they have the top 5-star athletes all year, and they pass the, quote, ridiculous eye test. So they're automatically in. Then is the rest of the world just fighting for 2 spots? I don't see how Alabama gets – I can see how they get in because the committee likes it and it might be a moneymaker. I don't see how they really deserve it.
This is where the playoff gets hairy. It's, as you said, it's been a lot of the same teams over 4 years. Ohio State's made it 3 times. Alabama's been in it every single time. Oklahoma's been in it a couple times. Clemson's been in it 3 times. I don't want to expand the playoff because I think college football's regular season is awesome, and you don't want to mess with it. I really like the bowl system, actually. It gives me something to watch in December. But if you're really truly going the best team and you're going to put a 3-loss team in, why bother playing the regular season? Just go to preseason camps and say, you know what, these teams have the most 5-star recruits. They have the best athletes. They're clearly the best team. They weren't focused, or whatever the excuse was. They lost to these teams. We're just going to put them in, and then your product becomes like the NBA. Whereas, okay, Cleveland got off to a bad start, or Golden State got off to a bad start, but you know what? Let's just put them in the finals.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's just that's why I always root for upsets, but I'm almost a little leery of rooting for upsets this weekend. I don't necessarily like Clemson being in it again, but I can go with the order that it's in. Clemson, Auburn, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, I think would be an enjoyable Final Four, although I'm still not sold on Wisconsin. But I really don't want to see Alabama in, and I really don't want to see Ohio State in. And I don't see any other way other than those 4 teams winning to keep one of those 2 teams out. And that's just – I mean, maybe that's more of my fan bias than actual analysis. But I do have a feeling you're going to see one of Alabama or Ohio State, or maybe both of them, end up back in if there's some upsets.
Well, if both of them end up in, you're going to have a really fun Saturday this weekend. But it takes away from the regular season. If Wisconsin gets left out, then you know what? Maybe the only pro out of that is go play somebody out of conference. They tried to play BYU. BYU stinks. They played like FAU and some other lousy school. Wisconsin should be playing a better schedule than that. Maybe you see this FCS SEC, challenge in November, and where everybody plays a FCS foe the second to last week in November before rivalry week.
The Big Ten's going to be in trouble if they don't get a team in, and it's going to be because of conference alignment. Wisconsin played who they were given to play. The year before, Wisconsin opened up against LSU, so I don't think they try to schedule away from toughies. It just didn't work out. But that's the same as Alabama. It didn't work out this year. You didn't play any tough teams. But that's partly the Big Ten's problem right now with the crossover games and the way it is, as we kind of talked about this afternoon a little bit. And I think you got to have good wins. And right now, Clemson has good wins. Oklahoma has good wins, and Auburn has good wins, and that's why they're there. And I like that a lot better than this eye test. So,
yeah, well, I think the committee is rooting for Wisconsin to lose just so they don't have to make the argument over, do we leave an undefeated team out? If Wisconsin wins over Ohio State 17-14, and Miami beats Clemson in quadruple overtime, are you leaving one of those ACC teams out?
Yeah, no. I think they put Wisconsin forth to protect themselves, basically, with saying an undefeated team's going to get in over. They didn't want to get in that position.
We're not buying their stock. We're just putting them in because they're 12-0.
Yeah, because if they do win, then it's 13-0. Instead of arguing for a week or a few days that whether they deserve it or not, I think that's what happens. So a very interesting week of college football. It's why we like it. It's why you follow it, Sammy. It's why I enjoy college football. The fans are going to go crazy. I had a chance to go to the Big Ten championship. I had to pass it up due to some coaching responsibilities, but there's my friends are going down at 2:00 and they're hanging out at the pep rallies and those things. It's the spirit of college football. Any last thoughts, Sammy, before we sign off?
Yeah, just enjoy this weekend of conference championship games. And if you're rooting for realignment in the Big Ten, root for Ohio State. If you're rooting for, upsets, root for upsets. But it's going to be a very interesting way how this all shakes out for the college football playoff and the New Year's Six. And if there are any IU fans listening, let's stay away from the ledges and sharp objects. Everything's going to be okay. And they'll figure it out by signing day and things like that. But, yeah, disappointing end of the season. But, I mean, this is what college football is all about. You have awesome championship games this weekend. If you're down in Indy, do get to the Big Ten championship game. I've gone several times. It's a ton of fun. There's the Fan Fest, which is usually empty on Friday, the Friday before. And packed on Saturday. So if you don't want to wait in lines, go on Friday.
Well, Sammy, I appreciate you a lot for our friendship, but also for your knowledge about college football. I appreciate you joining me on this podcast. We'll probably have you on in a couple of weeks to discuss bowl games of interest, and I look forward to a fun December of college football. So that does it for the Championship Week Sports Talk with Tonsoni podcast. Please follow us on Twitter or send me an email. I'd be glad to answer any questions and give you my thoughts on your questions. So it's at Tonsoni1 at Twitter, and enjoy this weekend's football games. See you later.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
Mhm.